But Open Brother. This is the Open Brother Project. I'm your host, Colin Cummings. I'm here with Joel Witton. Did I say that right, or is it Witton?
You got it right the first time, Witten.
Okay. Here with Joel. I'm gonna call you a spiritual coach. That's what I'm
Yes.
gonna call you because like in my life, that's what you've been thus far. You've been pastor coach to me, you know?
It's funny for myself. I've sort of kind of played with what terminology would I use, because I've essentially been coaching people in that regard for the last 22 years.
Right.
Off and on different leadership teams and small men's groups or mixed groups and that type of stuff. So it's like there's certain language within the church world, and then there's certain language in the business world, and it's sort of like where do the two cross over, or how do you want to define yourself? But yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that. I define myself the same way.
Yeah, man. Yeah. You've been very helpful in that regard of bridging that whole thing, but bridging it like in a natural, non-stuffy way. The way you always say about like, we're not all Ned Flanders types and everything like that. You really brought it to me like that, and I'm forever grateful for that, man. Definitely. But besides that, how did we meet? We met, I was working film and television. I was watching a parking lot, getting my life together. Then all of a sudden I seen this guy dressed fresh from head to toe. It was a Sunday, I believe. And they were like, yeah, they were like, yeah, this guy was like, yeah, church is going to be starting. Then we'll be out of here. And in my head, I'm like, this guy doesn't have a suit in his hand or anything. I'm like, you going to church like that? And, uh, and yeah, and then we just talked for a little while just about church and what you do and everything. And then we just kind of stayed in contact. Well, not even stayed in contact. We just stayed following each other for
Yeah.
like three years. Um, and
The,
then,
the power of an Instagram follow. I'll tell
right,
you.
right, right. It's good for something, Sometimes it's good for things.
Exactly.
So we just stayed in contact, and then I don't even know what prompted it. You just shouted me out. You're like, yo, do you want to come to a men's group type of thing you had going on?
You liked something that I posted.
Ah,
I can't remember what it was. We could probably backtrack it and see, but you liked something. It was a story, or it was something I posted on something I posted, and then it sort of recon. And I didn't even remember at first. And you might have changed your handle a couple of times too. I'm not sure, but I didn't even
yeah,
remember at first. I had to like try and remember it and place you. And I was like, "Yo, da da da." I think I hit you up, and you go, "Yo, from the and then you know how you get that one trigger word like, oh, the parking lot in the church. Boom, all the memories just come are right there. They just come right back. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. It's funny. Yeah, and then that was it. Reconnected. Been in a men's group, and it was one of those things where God came through because I was thinking of starting a men's group. And I was
Mm.
like, I need that type of community. And then all of a sudden you came through and you were like, yo, I got that type of community. And I've been showing up ever since, trying to. I think I missed maybe one, maybe.
Maybe you've been super consistent. So
Yeah. I like that type of stuff. It's very needed in the community. Men speaking, even if it's about scripture, God, but just men meeting up and just having that openness, being able to like, even if it's just about scripture, it's like you still have that open communication to talk about something else, which we often do, right? We get into other things, and it's just good. It's just good, man.
well, and there's a lot of people jumping on the whole idea of holistic living, right?
Mm,
Um, Spirit, soul, body. But a lot of people don't necessarily have a good foundation or background when it comes to the spiritual side. So there's a lot of knowledge out there for the 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 soul side, your mind, your will, your emotions. There's a lot of knowledge out there for the physical side, the body side, but the spirit side, a lot of people kind of ambiguous, and there's kind of soup to nuts out there. So that's an area that I, we got a pretty good foundation and history and depth in. And like you said, it's just a matter of making it practically uh, attainable, getting rid of the Christianese, the
mm.
words that only make sense within that culture, and say, okay, what's the equivalent? How do you translate that to an everyday? everyday man. And once you get there, man, it's just like when you actually get relationship with God, you actually get connection with God. That's the essence of life.
Yeah.
But most people, when you think about that's why one of the terms you'll hear out in the world, you'll hear in entertainment, you'll hear just out in general in society now is, oh, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, because there's so much baggage and negativity attached to religion, because the people who were in religion weren't doing it right in a lot of cases. So I found a lot of people's experience with God is not my experience with God. So I have to help them get it, because I'll say God and I'm thinking my experience and they're hearing their experience. And I've actually been in those contexts. And, I'm someone who loves God, who's grown up in the church, grown up really trying to follow God's path for my life and honor him in the way that I live my life. And I've been in religious settings where I would rather sit in a room and watch paint dry almost. Like, it's like, I'm like, man, like I've never wanted to get out of a room so badly. And I love God. So if this is a lot of people's context, just like religious ritual and form that's devoid of an actual relationship or reality of God, then I get it. And then so you gotta take that into context when you're sharing with people. I'm not meaning what your experience was. There's something better. There's something actually real that we were made for. And once you get that, it lights everybody up. Everyone's made for a relationship with God. It's just a matter of finding that real connection.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Definitely. Like, I definitely feel that 100%. Cause yeah. For me, it's always like when you talk about, it's almost like broken telephone you're talking about. Because for
Yeah.
me, it's like when I hear about religion, I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood where it's like I lived right behind the synagogue, and it's like I'm not allowed in that synagogue. Not like if I'm not wearing a suit, I'm not of the religion, I'm not the right color, all these different things. It's like I can't go inside of there. So like when I hear about religion, I'm like, it's almost like segregation comes up in my head. So it's like, oh, I don't want to be a part of somebody who's perpetuating that type of segregation, right?
Yeah.
So once I met you, and I always had that little image in my head, I'm like, I was still living behind the synagogue, but I was like, there is a church where you can wear Jordans. I'm like, I know there is. I saw this guy. He's wearing a backwards hat. He's going in with Jordans. I'm like, that does exist somewhere. I'm like,
Well, and then you go in and the worship leader is wearing a fresh pair of J's yesterday.
yeah, yeah, right.
And then you flip over and the pastor's wearing J's while he's preaching, and it's like it's not everything, but it helps give a contextual shift for you. It's sort of like, oh, I can see myself in that context. It's
Yeah.
I think I could do it that way. That type of vibe.
Right. Now all of a sudden it's like, can I preach? Can I preach too? Because I'm in the I got a pair of Jordans. Can I come in? It's like, yeah, it's a really good vibe, really good vibe. And I've been thankful for it ever since I started coming. But to the questions, you mentioned that you grew up in the church. And
Yeah.
I haven't actually never got to ask you about it, but like, what was it like growing up around that all the time? Like, what was your childhood like in that regard?
Hmm. It was it's interesting because when you grow up with it, that's all you know.
Mm,
So and the thing I love about my mom, my dad is they they're really the first and the many times the biggest impact as to a lot of your perspective. So for instance, in terms of relationship with God or religion as you have it, if you have parents who go to church but then they don't really live it at home, it sets a precedent in a child's mind. Well, I was fortunate enough to have parents who really lived it. Like they went on Sundays, but that's just part, like they're living their lives for God. So it's like every day is sort of through the lens of, okay, well, how does this look through a biblical lens, or how would God have you deal with your finances? How would God have you deal with relationships? It's sort of like that becomes the measuring stick, that becomes the lens through which you're looking. And then church on Sundays was a non-negotiable. Like it was just one of those things where I used to play rep soccer when I was little, and there was times where it's like I'd maybe miss a game on a Sunday morning, and Sundays is like that's semifinals, you know what I mean? Or I'd go and then my parents might not be there, they'd be at church, but then they'd come and they kind of fiddle with that one. They were kind of stringent on that and then sort of loosened that a little bit later. But you just saw the commitment level of we're not putting sports before God. You know, we're not putting one commitment, like what commitment you is prioritized, you know, and that was set real strong from a young age. And it's funny, even like I think the story goes, my mom had me and or had my brother, like and then like a few days, like 3 days later, I'm in church, you know what I mean, as a little baby. So it's like, you know, you're literally born right into it. And it's
Wow.
but just that presence of that commitment where it's like, and that militancy almost, like, you know, some people, oh, just take it easy. It's never like, no, that's where I want to be. That's where I want my child to be. That's the sort of the culture I want to set, and sort of that commitment level. So, and then my mom used to do devotions with us where she'd like play her guitar and she knew like her 3 chords and she'd play different worship songs and we'd sit around, and the same devotional book you were just showing me, like she'd do a devotion with us as kids. So we'd do some worship songs and then she'd read a devotion with us. And that was a like I have many memories of that as a child, where my mom would sit us down and sort of take us through the word or teach us or do worship songs with us to sort of to start building that connection with God from a young age.
Wow.
So it was cool. It was cool. I mean, it's because it's all you know. And then also the other aspect was my parents, they were watchful. What it wasn't just any old church. It was like, one, God, where do you want us to be? And then two, um, is this a vibrant, healthy spiritual environment? Because just like we were talking about, if it's not just a box you check, well, I made it inside the doors of a church. It's like, if it's not a healthy environment where you're actually, it's facilitating real connection with God and the people are actually living principled, integral lives as leaders, then that can be a negative. Like it's almost, in some ways, it's worse to have a negative experience with religion when you're young than not to have any experience at all, because it's almost like I've talked about this experience with God with many people over the years. You know, the whole idea of, if you're first introduced to a chocolate chip cookie and the person didn't know how to make it, and they put like way too much baking soda, way too much salt, and you had that chocolate chip cookie, it's like, now you have ingrained in you this negative connotation to chocolate chip cookie, and you might get like a nice Miss Fields, whatever type of cookie, or one of these cookies that they give gourmet at a dessert place, you know, like a Dominic's or whatever, like type of dessert place, and you're like, no, I'm not really a chocolate chip cookie type of person. But you just don't know because you had a bad experience with it. Like, if you really knew what you're missing out on, and so that's really the importance of having that positive experience. And if someone's looking to live for God or represent God, then really being watchful that if you're talking the talk, you're walking the walk, so that you're not throwing people off with a bad recipe, you know.
True. That's a good analogy towards the whole thing. And it is, I guess, better because, like, my wife came with me to church just recently, just the other week, and like she had never been in a church ever in her life. Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was like,
That's interesting. What was that experience like for her?
that was like, she like, because of the vibe it was, she's like, this is good. She's like, she was able to come in and not feel weird about what she was wearing. She's able to come in and feel like she didn't have to say everything and do everything. She was just able to be there and take in what he was saying, your brother.
Yeah.
Like, so for her, it was like, it was good. She liked the whole experience. She was like, I'll definitely come again. She's like, she's not usually off on Sundays. We're trying to make it so she can get off on Sundays every week.
Yeah.
But, until then, it's like, when she does have another Sunday, she definitely wants to come. And she
Yeah.
definitely liked just being a part of something that's a part of my life, right? Like she was like, so good to meet Joel. She got to meet Chris, which was, part of the League Alliance.
Yeah. Yeah.
She met your dad briefly, like, so she's like, these are all really good people, so it was
Yeah.
like, for her it just made sense. She's like, I could do this every week, like, why couldn't you?
I love that. I love that soundbite of someone who like that's it may not be as rare as it used to be, but it's like it's still relatively rare to be able to get someone who's never had a negative or good experience, like just coming in fresh slate. And what does that experience like? That feedback is really interesting.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
and the thing I love about you too is like, well, she followed you. She probably wouldn't just jump up there, but it's like
Mm.
her first Sunday, she's on the front row.
Yeah, we had to do it like that, of course,
That's how we
like,
do, man. That's how we do. That's the type of people we are. We're front row type of people, you know.
yeah, I had to be up front, and
We
like,
want
she
to
liked
catch,
the
we
whole
want
thing.
to catch the passenger spit on our forehead type
Yeah.
of catch.
Right, like, and it was funny, the one thing she said, she's like, as we were leaving, she's like, is Joel's dad praying over someone's feet? I'm like, yeah, like, maybe they had a problem with their feet because your dad just had somebody's legs. He's just like, all right, let's get this, and he's going in for him.
I love
she's
that. I love
she's
that.
like she's like, what's going on there? I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, maybe she had a little problem with their feet.
Yeah,
Joel's dad's just giving her a little bless. But she liked the whole thing. She was like, this is cool.
I
So
love it.
it's better that she had no experience at all, because if it was a negative experience, she might have fought that a little bit you
Oh,
know
for sure, for
and
sure.
same with me as well. Like my mom will tell me stories about, like, when I was little, going to church, like when I was like 2 and 3 years old, but like, I don't have any memory of that at all. Like, I don't know what church that was, nothing. So for me, it was kind of the same thing, and I'm glad that that was the experience, right? Like, just being the main thing for me is, like, I like to be able to dress. I don't like being judged for how I'm dressed, you know, because that's like
Yeah,
a big thing in like an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. Like, you're very judged as soon as you're not wearing your whole penguin suit that they got. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, I know what you are, and I know who you are, and I have an understanding of what you're about. So that
yeah.
was the main thing for me.
There's certain Christian churches like that too, where it's like there's a major emphasis on or culture set on dress. Some people get into the kind of religious minutia of not wearing makeup or
Mm,
girls wearing long skirts or women wearing hats and men not wearing hats, men's hair being short, like just all this nonsense that just takes away from the essence of what you're supposed to be there for. And the Bible literally says, like Jesus said at one point, your your I'm trying to remember the wording exactly, but like your rituals have made the power of God of no effect. So it can literally choke. It can really choke the experience to where it completely shifts it to being just a rigid, legalistic, non-interactive experience where there's certain services where God's presence isn't really there.
mm.
So, and when you think about it, it's like if God's not there, what are we doing?
True. Who are we really bowing to in that sense if God's not there? You're
No?
following all these religions or all these rituals of somebody else, right?
Yeah, and it sort of becomes like uniform, like you talk about the church or the setup, and some people they sort of find their identity in that, and then like you said, if you're not wearing that, then it's sort of like, oh, you're not, like it's sort of you're not there, you haven't arrived yet,
Mm,
and uh, into whatever it is that they're sort of perceiving as a rival, but which is also interesting because you can also get the flip where people they conform
mm,
they conform, but they don't transform.
mm.
You
There we
know,
go. I like that. I like that. I
and
like that a lot.
there's a scripture in Romans 12 too. It says, "Do not be conformed to this world." So conformed is like shaped into like you get different sized glasses, and water just conforms to whatever's in the glass.
Mm,
Just takes the shape of whatever position it's put in. And God said, "Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." I think we've mentioned that scripture before,
mm,
um, just in past conversations. But the interesting thing is a lot of times when you just get religion without relationship, you go from conforming to the world to conforming to the church, and you still are missing the essence of what he's saying was transformation, which is transformation. Literally, the root word is metamorphosis,
Mm,
like tadpole into bullfrog,
mm,
caterpillar into butterfly. Which, when you give your life to God and you become a child of God, all the potential, just like the tadpole has all the DNA, has all the potential to become a full-fledged frog. Complete transformation process on the outside, internally, but it needs that hormonal change and that process in life, that threshold shift to be able to manifest that. It's the same thing with us. When we give our lives to God, we might still have a lot of the habits, a lot of the things that don't necessarily reflect the nature of God, reflect who he created us to be. But through that process of the renewing of our mind, slowly but surely, who we are now on the inside starts to manifest out through a transformation process.
mm.
And that's why you don't want to rush. You definitely don't, like, we get it in science. You don't rush a caterpillar. You just let him get in the cocoon, let him go through his process, and it's going to happen. If you rush it, if you open the cocoon too early, you could short circuit the process. It's the same thing with us. If you get somebody who's a little too conformity mentality in your corner, then they're trying to make you make changes that you're not ready to make yet.
Mm.
You're not supposed to make them yet. Maybe you're in a transformation process, and if you interject too much into what God's doing in that person's life, and you don't sort of team up and say, God, where are you at with them? Where are they at on their journey? Then you can short circuit their process.
100%, 100%, 100%. I learned from my coach, my other coach. I got a bunch of coaches, but he was saying it's actually it's good to have people push to their threshold, like around the area of their threshold. He's like, but it's actually irresponsible for you to push them right outside their comfort zone.
That's
He's
good.
like, because you don't actually know what they're ready for, and now you have the responsibility of bringing them back into their comfort zone, or like into their threshold area, and it's like, and you don't exactly know where that is, so it's like you don't push people too far, you push them just a little bit, you know what I mean?
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, so that makes sense. But I mean, back to you growing up, like how growing up, and like we can even go from like kid, maybe even teenager, young adult, how did you how did you deal with being in the world and then having this life of religion and this relationship with God, and like how all that contests and balances? Like
Yeah.
how was that for you?
Um, for myself, it went relatively well. That I look at it on the factor one, getting a good foundation early on, um, getting experiences, getting put in positions where I had experiences, so I knew God was real. It wasn't just my parents' religion. It was stuff that I'd had my own experiences in my own head, my own relationship with God, my own heart,
Mhm.
before entering into that gauntlet called, you know, teenage adolescence, and high school, where there's a lot of tests, there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot more freedom, there's a lot, and you're really finding yourself as an individual in those years. Up until 12, a lot of your ideas, a lot of your perspective is kind of just given to you by the environment that you're raised in. But when you're coming through that identity shaping and forming, you gotta figure out who you are, and because I remember just my mom taking us to different meetings where you saw God's presence show up, or where I had my own experiences, or there's this boys camp we went to around 10, 11, 12, me and my brother. And my brother's about 3 years older than me, 3 grade levels above me. And so we ended up at this boys camp where it's like, they're encouraging us as young men to go after God, and
Mm.
showing us. I remember, like, my favorite movie from young was the movie Glory. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Glory, but it's a
No, I don't think so.
dope movie. Early Denzel, Morgan Freeman, Matthew Broderick. It's like about the first black, um, uh, in the Civil War, one of the first black regiments, and their whole journey. And
uh,
it's but it's just like and then they'd share out of that about giving your life giving your life for a cause, and just something bigger than yourself, and just spoke to the manhood, spoke to that internal wiring that God's given us as young men to really fight for something. And that movie marked me from a young age. And so like you have all these different experiences. So when we got into, and then also I had my brother, I couldn't ask for a better big brother. Like he was always in my corner. I mean, I was a better athlete than him. I was like a star athlete. I was in like grade 5, 6. I was on one of the best team soccer wise in Ontario.
True.
Like a couple of guys that I used to play with ended up on the Olympic team, ended up playing professionally, and so on and so forth.
Wow.
And so I remember my brother sort of charting out what our positions would be and this and that, so on and so forth. And then going into grade 8, my brother was in grade 11 at the time, and he came back on his co-op to our school and ended up setting up, like, we are a small Christian school, but he ended up setting up like exhibition games with us against public schools and allowed us to have a basketball team. So, and I sort of shifted, was really big in basketball at that point. So he was always looking out for me that way, let me tag along. And because I was a better athlete, but he's older, it kind of, we were able to play a lot of one-on-one against each other. And like really, I was able to hang with him and his friends, and hold my own, or be able to play and different stuff. So coming into high school, he had kind of paved the way for me. So I was a good student, an outstanding athlete, so on and so forth. Already known going into high school for being a ball player in the area, and it was Pickering High School. So in the east side of Toronto, that was the biggest school. You got people like Corey Joseph coming out of there, who's NBA champion, 11-year vet now, and he was younger than us. But it was like that was the basketball program on the east side of Toronto, was Pickering High School, and so I was already known as an outstanding player coming in. So you kind of have that notoriety, and it's so it was and then I watched how my brother moved. So it's like, and I also had that feeling. I remember saying, like, in high school, I'd have almost a defiance where I don't need nobody. I got my brother, like, I mean, I don't need nobody. So I felt the pressure at times to conform, or to act out certain ways and stuff like that. But it was, I kind of was really grounded in my faith, where I said, I'm going to be a representative to other people of this. I'm going to be a witness of who God is to other people, as opposed to just sort of conforming to what everybody else is doing and trying to fit in. I just didn't feel the need to, so there was enough strength in my identity personally. And then also having a role model who was right there in my corner as well. Strong unit at home, a good youth group helped too. And it's like, so that kind of kept me grounded. But I remember even, definitely feeling like attacked and sort of almost picked on by some of the other star players. I was kind of in the same corner as them, but you move with them after school once or twice, and you're like, it's just not. You don't feel that connection because they're on a different wavelength, right? They're living life a different way, and so that kind of I wasn't going to come down to some of the stuff they were doing, and so it ended up at times where kind of felt like the spirit in them was coming at the spirit in me.
Of course.
And so it felt like at times I'd be targeted because of my faith, and they wouldn't necessarily know that's why they're targeting me, but it was like that's what was going on. And but it was, I was willing to kind of stand alone, had enough strength in who I was, and the foundation I had to make that stance. I remember in grade 11 one time, we were on a tournament, we were away, and it was guys go to a party, and then they bring back girls to the hotel, and we're talking grade 10, 11, raging hormone boys, what I mean?
Of course, yeah.
Out in Belleville with some party girls,
True.
And I'm in the room, and then there's, they bring these girls in. This one girl's trying to break into the bathroom. I'm in the bathroom trying to break into the bathroom.
Oh,
but like, come at me, you know what I mean? And
Trying
it's
to
like,
find the white boy. She's like, "Where's the white boy at? That white boy can ball."
uh, and and it's interesting because again, those type of situations, it's not like you're looking for it; it's just right in your face.
Mm,
And it was the middle of winter too, so I had excuses to stay in the hotel room. You know what I mean? It was like
yeah.
a dead blizzard outside, but I ended up um, leaving the hotel room and going for a walk in the middle of the blizzard to like the gas station, getting a little snack, whatever, and then coming back. But it was like just that that's I mean those are tests. Those are tests
Mm.
right there. You know what I mean? It's right there. Everybody's doing it, and it's kind of matching your natural anatomy, so to speak, in terms of just the way that you're wired on a natural level. But because I had that strength, that you pass those tests. So
Wow, wow. I would have failed that test twice. Would have failed that.
what
I would have failed that one, my man.
what's interesting too is like it's perspective, right? Because we're talking about manhood,
Mm,
and I think it was prior to that at a younger age. Like I was at my youth group, and they're talking about your sexuality and how you can honor God with your sexuality. You can honor God with your God-given design, and it framed it different because when you grow up in our culture as men, manhood is conquering. Manhood is going on the hunt. Man, and those things are true to our DNA. And so the way they're framing, going after girls is it's trying to release or have an outlet for that man-given desire to conquer, to go on the hunt, and it's framed in that way. But the framing was different in this context. It said the world's going to try and you're created to 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 honor God, to to honor your God-given design, and to honor your future wife.
mm.
And the world's going to try and take that from you. So your job as a man is to defend your purity.
Wow.
So it's the same. It hits the same buttons of manhood, but you're not on offense. You're on defense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You
True.
know what I'm saying? Or your offense is doing things for God's kingdom, but in the process, you know,
This guy-
you know what I'm saying? And it's like, okay, yo, come at me, try and take this from me. Like,
True.
and not necessarily an individual girl, but like the
Obviously.
devil's going to try and take that from you. The world, it's like a gauntlet. I don't know if you remember that show, American Gladiator.
Yeah.
Um, but there used to be this thing called the gauntlet, and it's like this kind of uh, long cylinder, and you had to try and get down the gauntlet. The
Yeah.
athlete would, and the gladiators would be standing there with these like things, and they try and pin you to the ground and stop, and you had to get by these gladiators, and they're trying to
Yeah.
stop you. And I got that picture like, yo, like your teenage years is like that gauntlet, and your job is to get through there unscathed. You know what I mean?
I was gonna say you're more like the gladiators. These girls are trying to get through the cylinder. They're like, what's going on over here?
Yo,
Yeah.
you know, and and so that's not to say I didn't have my own in personal struggles, or have issues with for myself, and not everybody does, but I got caught up a little bit with watching some stuff I shouldn't watch, or masturbation and stuff like that.
Of
But
course.
but, but for the most part, I was able to really keep myself pure, and then
Mm.
also and that kind of became a trophy for me. It's like, yo, I like even virginity became something I want to preserve.
Yeah.
I want this to be exclusive. This is a valuable thing that I want to preserve for the girl I'm going to marry. That
Yeah.
became
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
goal. That became the championship, you know?
True.
And so what are you willing to sacrifice for the sake of a championship?
Man, that's see that's a good lesson in discipline. I mean, it's like it's such a foreign one today. I mean, even me, like I was telling Chris when we were at the men's breakfast, like when I was 13, 14, 15, I was like 350 pounds. And like the reason I lost 200 pounds is like, cause I'm trying to get rid of this virginity. I'm out here, I'm trying to, I'm like, it's never gonna
I'm
happen.
trying to get rid of it. It's like this is like a bad label on me right now, you know?
Well, it's yeah, because it's like my brother. I mean, forgive me, brother, but he lost his when he was 12.
Hmm.
You know, my other brother was like 13, 14. I was like, yo, I'm lacking right now, you know, like I
Yes.
gotta follow in the footsteps properly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like,
No, but that's the thing, man. It's like that becomes without the proper fathering and um, thresholds or rites of passage. We've
mm,
lost the healthy rites of passage. That becomes the rite of passage.
true,
You see what I'm
true
saying?
enough.
And it's like, what are you supposed to do? If that's
Mm.
if in your perspective that's become the rite of passage, it's like now you're using all your energies and your focus to do the thing that's actually going to be damaging to you and damaging to the other person. And it's like, it was like a losing game from the start because it's like you want that manhood, you want that rite of passage, but the rite of passage is something that's in our culture is actually something that's not in your best interest at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, in reality, right? Like I could have got a girl pregnant, this, that. Like a lot of things could have happened at a really early age. I mean, thank God it didn't. But yeah, man, it was that was like a big proponent for me. So it's like it's a crazy feat of self-discipline that you had that. Cause like for me, it was like I was always like a girlfriend guy. And I remember I had a lot of those tests when I had a girlfriend. That was like
Mhm.
my kind of
Yes,
test. Like
yes,
girls would come at me. I just lost weight. I was like, this guy, like back when I had hair, I had to twist up, you know what I mean? It was like, it's like I had it going, So I was growing dreads and everything, before I realized that male pattern baldness was about to creep up on me. I had all that going. So I had some girls that, really wanted to, do the thing and I had to like back up and nah, I can't do that. And I have a girlfriend and I was always like that type of person. So I've experienced the test, but in different ways,
yes, 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 yes.
Even as you're explaining like the whole thing of having your brother and everything, it's like I had a very opposite, like kind of the same thing, but opposite because I had my brother around and you know he was an athlete, but I mean in the regards to what we were doing, I was like in terms of like gang culture, street culture, like i was I was a better athlete than him.
Yeah,
I was out there, I was moving things, I was doing stuff a little more so than he ever did. So I was able to hang with the older guys because it was
yeah,
like, yo, he's already out here. He's robbed two people. He did this. He did that. It's like, why can't he hang? Like, what? He's
yeah,
doing it already. He's like, why
yeah.
can't he be here? And slowly my brother had to give in, but then my brother was always there for me just in case anything happened. So it was kind of like the same kind of thing, but towards the negative side because we were like out here just running wild.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I always had my brother, you know what I mean? I always felt like I didn't need anybody. I didn't care what the kids my age were saying. I didn't care what they were doing. It was like, yo, I got my brother. I got our own little community, our own little, youth group going on, like so it was like, man them youth group. So it was different, but like kind of the same thing. So I get that definitely having your brother there.
Well, and it's interesting because for me, that's who you were, and that whole group is the guys I still grew up with because
Mm,
I was in basketball gyms all the time. So that was like the joining area where I may not participate in the parties or this or that, but I was good at ball. So that garners you a lot of respect at that age, especially being a white guy who was good at ball too. It's sort of like you kind of became like even more standout.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
and so it's like you become well known for this, so that you get a certain level of respect and a certain level of friendship.
Mm,
So it's like I always had, you grow up and you get those people. It's funny, I'm a speaker now, but you get those speakers back in the day. Oh, don't do drugs or whatever, and kind of get the picture of a drug dealer or whatever. It's like the drug dealers were my friends in high school. Like those were the guys, and I saw them on the human level. Like, it's like you're not seeing them through a lens of, oh, they're this person in society. They're your boy, they're your friend. It's like they're just into some mess that they shouldn't be into, but it's like you still love them for who they are. It's like,
Yeah, I always had that because I had like a lot of friends. Well, I mean, the dudes I grew up with, you know, some of them were fresh out of jail. Some of them had done long stints in like federal and this and that. And as much as people would be like, they're this person, they're that person, I had that human experience. Like a
Yeah.
lot of these guys that I'm talking about, like they can tell me stories about like, yo, I remember when your mom was pregnant and she let us touch the belly and we could feel you kick. And it's like, you know, like their family. It's like I see them on that human level and I see their parents. Their parents are like, oh, come here, little Colin. And
Yeah.
you know, so it's like I always saw them on the more human level. And that always made it so I couldn't, it's not like I couldn't walk away. It's like there was no need to. It was like we're all family. It's all good. Like it was just like, yeah, it was an odd upbringing. But it's weird to see the similarities there, even though we were on different ends of the spectrum,
Yeah.
so to
Yeah.
speak, you
Yeah.
know? But going into manhood, moving away from the adolescent, or even if it's still there, but just straight up, what was a time where you felt the least like a man in your life?
The least like a man. And it's a funny question because I don't know if I've ever thought of it, like it comes down to what is a man, right? So it's like the for myself, I mean, I don't know if I would have ever had the thought, I don't feel like a man in this circumstance,
Mm,
but in terms of the strength and um the courage, those things which to me are very embodied in the idea of manhood. I would probably say there's been a number of different times where I've gone through a mental breakdown of sorts where and I've actually struggled this. It's interesting because you hear that storyline of my childhood, which is all true. But at the same time, there were seasons through my childhood and into my high school age where I was dealing with some serious mental illness
mm,
stuff, and I was trying to have those battles, and my and I made my family aware of it early on, so I always had them in my corner. So I had people, I had safe places that sort of I could express or that knew what was going on, and I knew I was still accepted for me. But for school, for the most part, there might have been times where people like, yo, Joel's kind of looks like he looks like he's talking to himself or he's tripping or something. Like they might have seen that, but they wouldn't know the extent of what I was dealing with in my mind in terms of just having all like schizophrenic type stuff, um, realities that weren't true, obsessive compulsive thoughts of feeling like I had to apologize for everything, or just regarding certain dark things that I'd be scared of. Like it was just some weird stuff, right?
mm,
And that stuff would torment me, like, and at certain seasons, day after day, week after week, it just felt like suffocating.
mm,
And you don't know if you're ever going to be normal. So that would probably be the time where I felt the least like the man that I wanted to be,
mm,
or the fear that I'd never be able to be the man that I wanted to be.
mm.
You
True,
know, in terms of like
true.
live a normal life, hold down a relationship, uh, take on the normal, because it was such a battle just to exist.
Mm,
It was, you know, the idea of being someone great in the world, or you know, accomplishing other things, just felt like would be an overwhelming thought, because it's like I can't even defend my own mind right now, you know. It's like
man, yeah, I feel that. I had that same thing growing up because like I had like, you know, like it was never brought to me, but like as I learned about psychology and behavioral science and stuff and just mental illness, like I would say borderline like clinical depression from the time that my dad disappeared, which was and I was assaulted as a kid. That was 8 years old,
wow.
right up until like 21 years old. Like it was just massive depression. And that was like not even months at a time. That would be like years at a time. Just like straight depressed, couldn't get my mind together, didn't understand why I couldn't get my mind together and like why can't I be like everybody else kind of thing.
Yeah.
I definitely feel that, man. Like hard. And yeah, and then also like feeling like you're supposed to be something greater. And it's like, how can I ever be great along with all of this? Like, nah, like this is like, I can't even get through this little part. I don't even know. Like I used to always think when I was like a teenager, I'm like, yo, I'm gonna be homeless. I'm gonna be homeless. I'm like, I can't even hold a job. I can't keep a job for more than like 2 months. I'm like, I can't do this. I'm like, this is gonna be insane. Like, how am I gonna handle any of this stuff?
Yeah.
It was really bad. It was really bad. That was part of the reason I got into meditation, because like I started reading the literature and like it said it could help your brain and things like that. And I was like, yo, let me, because I didn't have any, the only religion around me was Judaism, right? Like there was no churches around me, it was all synagogues and I couldn't go inside there, right? So I turned to meditation, and like that was the thing that like started helping me get my mind in check. And then I found I say all the time, thank God for iPhones. You know, I know they bring a lot of evil in the world, but they had something called iTunes University, and like you just had these free courses that you could take or
Yes.
free lectures that you could listen to. And that was like the thing that started helping my mind and helping me like get more educated and helping me not smoke weed constantly because I wanted to listen to this thing that was 2 hours long. And yeah, it's like, yeah, but like the whole wrestling with everything like that, yeah, that was the hardest part growing up, wrestling with your own mind and not
Bro,
knowing if it's gonna change.
bro, and the crazy thing for me is I had a phenomenal support system.
Mm,
Like, so that's the, I don't know if I'd be there if I didn't have that. You know what I mean? Like that's the lengths at which it was. It was like my mom fought with me and fought for me on a regular basis. And we didn't have any context. I'm sure there's some things on the physiological side of things that could have helped. But where the whole psychology and the system was at that point, it wasn't great. There's still a lot of still a lot more stigma, and just the whole medicate everything, like basically dull the problem, don't solve the problem type of vibe. And so I'm glad that we didn't really have a context in that regard. We just saw it all through a spiritual lens.
yeah.
Um, but so there's some diet stuff that probably could have helped. There's some different understanding stuff that could have helped at that time in terms of just understanding how um, levels of sugar are interacting with your gut and your psychology and all that different stuff. But the interesting aspect, and this is where it's not just a spiritual issue, and it's not just a soul issue or like a psychology level, almost as if you could separate the two, which you really can't, because spirit, soul, and soul are so intertwined. It's almost like your soul, if you look at your mind, your will, and your emotions, they're kind of extensions or the equipment that your spirit operates in this world with, right? So it's like they're mixed together, almost like Play-Doh. Once you mix that Play-Doh together, you can't really separate the colors no more.
Mm,
And so they have those, so you can attack from the different angles. But the interesting aspect and why it was so real on the spiritual side was, and it's interesting, you look at a lot of people, a lot of schizophrenic stuff, and you hear a lot of stuff with paranoia regarding conspiracy theories, all that stuff, but regarding spiritual stuff, right?
mm,
And it's interesting how often you hear people talk about stuff related to the spiritual realm. And uh, the experience for me was what the things that I knew that would help build me stronger. That was sometimes the biggest fight to get done, like reading the Bible, or taking certain scriptures and confessing them over my life, like a positive affirmations.
mm,
It, I'd have such attack in my mind with a flare up of those thoughts and stuff like that when I would try and do that.
mm.
So that right there was an indication, oh, there's something going on more than here than just some, like I already saw it as a spiritual thing. But even looking back, when people say, well, there's like, they try and label something in psychology, and psychology doesn't really acknowledge the spiritual realm, at least on the secular side of things.
Yeah.
But there's the interaction of, there's a scripture in Proverbs that says, a man without self-control is like a city without walls.
Mm,
Look at that time, your walls were everything in your defense, right? They lay siege to the walls. If they got past the wall, the fight's pretty much over. And it said a man without self-control is with like a city without walls. And that's what I felt like often. It's like any thought could come in. And bro, just dark, weird thoughts that would make you feel like, why am I thinking that? Like, that's so shameful. Like, you feel like crawling up like under a rock and just giving up on life because, like,
Mm,
if that thought's in my mind, like, that's a gross thought. I don't want to think that, but it's like you can't get rid of it. And now you're afraid of it. Now the fear draws, that obsessive nature to focus on that thing that you're afraid of. And it's just like, it's sort of this nasty cycle. But all that stuff. And then when I try and do the stuff that would counteract or that I'd see that would build my spirit up, there'd be such an attack.
oh yeah,
And
yeah.
so the one area that I found the most success as to the weapons to build myself spiritually was worship.
Mm,
So it's like the whole idea of putting my mind on God and singing songs about him, to him, and sort
mm,
of magnifying him in my mind and seeing that as just as a weapon, not just seeing it as something you do as just a spiritual practice or something you do to just get closer, but it's something that you can do that actually allows him to fight for you. And
mm,
so there's spiritual principles to it, but that was a huge one for me. And then another huge aspect was when uh, got. I remember my mom came to me and one time and she said, "Joel, you got so much good stuff inside of you, but it's locked up because you get stuck in your own mind."
mm,
And it's like you need to start pouring your life into somebody else.
mm,
And bro, that was one of the biggest keys to my deliverance and me overcoming some of those areas and getting my mind right was when I found somebody, or God sent me somebody to pour my life into and
mm,
to get my mind off myself and let that love and that goodness that was inside of me, all these treasures of understanding information that I'd been poured into my whole life, was kind of locked up there because I was stuck in this obsessive compulsive cycle in my brain of
yeah.
toxic and fear and insecurity and all this different stuff. And it's like, but when I got my mind on someone else, there was a young man named Randy who was grade 6 at the time, and he had his parents had broken up, and he was just a real angry little kid who was just hurt, broken, life's not going well, and he's giving his mom a lot of trouble and she couldn't handle him, so she sent him to live with his grandma. Well, my mom had met the grandma at a dry cleaners randomly one day and
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
built relationship. And then so she reached out to my mom, and my mom said, "Hey, she got her grandson named Randy, grade 6, who's giving her a lot of problems, and he was just upset with life and so on and so forth. I think you should connect with him, big brother styles,
Yeah.
And it was, and so that was the start for me, was connecting with Randy and just uh, concerning myself and focusing my mind and helping Randy get through his stuff.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I had a lot of that. I had a lot of that growing up, not in the big brother vibe, but just like with any one of my friends, anytime anybody was going through anything, I would
Mm.
because it's like you're constantly taking things in, and then the biggest thing is it's like when you have all these positive influence or positive like knowledge inside of you that you can give out, it's like once you're giving it out, it's like you're teaching it. And once
Yes.
you're teaching it, it's like it solidifies more. And you would never pour out all the negative inside your mind into somebody. So it's like you said, it's like it makes it kind of focused.
Yeah.
It's like you can't have that negative stuff while you're pouring out all this positive stuff. So it's almost like it moves to the side. I had that a lot. I mean, up until, I mean, I still do it to this day. I mean, if I talk to somebody, like right away, I'm trying to help them. If they have an issue, I'm trying to help them. Most of my friends know they can come to me and talk about, big issues, things going on, life stuff, girl stuff, like anything really. So yeah, I definitely feel that. And you know what, as you're telling this story, I keep thinking of like what Mike Tyson once said. He goes like, when you're highly favored by God, you're also highly favored by the devil
Mm.
you know and as
Yeah.
you're thinking of like, because it's like you have like these thoughts, it's like me and my buddy Kevin, we've talked about this a lot together. It's like those aren't even your thoughts. But like when you start taking them in like they're yours, that's when it gets very dismal in your life, because you're like, I'm thinking this, but in
Yes.
reality it is like a city without walls, and those are just coming in. It's like you like still to this day, like I'll have certain thoughts like that or certain fear that will pop up, and I'm like, that's not me. Like I don't think that. That's not happening. I notice that happens with me anytime like my life's going real good.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
something real good will happen, and like or things are going real good, and I'll just have like an image of like something bad happening, and I'm like, nah, 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 that's not happening. That's
yeah,
not happening. Like get
yeah,
out of that. Get out of that. Like yeah, it happens. It happens. It's happened way less now in the past like 4 years of my life because I'm
yeah,
like accepting that I'm worthy of good things.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
bad things aren't coming, but yeah, man, I feel you on that. The mental health stuff. But that
Well,
what you said actually brought me back to my buddy, the last guy I interviewed, Nick. It's kind of like on the same vibe, like when you're thinking about like everything that you were going through. Because his thing when I asked that question, he was like, just not being able to do something that I set out to do.
yeah,
It's like you're setting out to think properly or do this task and you can't do it. And like that can be like an emasculating thing. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Just that,
Well,
just that.
and I can relate to that one too, just in terms of wanting to uh, keep keep your word to yourself and failing to do so. Like,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's a huge one, man. That's a big one for me. I mean, struggling with addiction and stuff. I mean, that was when I had my main breakdown that I told you about, where I started praying to God and stopped praying to the universe.
yeah.
Started praying to the architect and instead of the structure, so to speak. And yeah,
Well,
man.
you know,
You're going to a house asking the house to build you a house, and the house is just like, I can't do anything for you, man.
I'm not talking to your painting behind you, Colin. I'm talking to you.
Yeah, exactly, right? Man, yeah, yeah. So I definitely feel that. But on the other side of things, when
Yeah.
was a time where you felt the most like a man?
The most like a man. You know what? I mean, it could be said the times when I've knocked it down, when I've taken on a task and said I'm going to do something and I do knock it down. That's just the fundamental everyday level. Um, just the other end of that spectrum of keeping your word gives you that confidence that, I can take anything on, you know.
Mm,
Um, the other times would be probably, I think of times when we've been on these things called encounters that our church will do, where we take a bunch of men up for a weekend and we take them through a whole process of 4 weeks of pre-encounter, of prepping them for the weekend and helping them make certain decisions in their own heart to align themselves spiritually so that when the weekend comes, they can get the most out of it.
mm,
And then you get on that weekend and you're just, um, you're fully serving other men, and you're spiritually, you're going to war on their behalf.
mm,
And when you see the impact of your blood, sweat, and tears helping result in other men getting free and like being able to now go home with that freedom to their world, to their family, or what have you, that's probably that those are like those championship moments. I think of Golden State just the other day. They reached that pinnacle, and uh, it's that's the interesting thing about sports is there's an end game, there's an end goal, and there's a mountaintop that you're reaching for. So it kind of has that, but a lot of times for us as men in life, we don't really have those established. So we don't really set up a context in which we can have that experience,
mm.
whether we're not in teams or whether we don't have major goals that we're shooting for. We know, and you've quantified them, you've qualified them so that you know when you've reached it and you can celebrate it. It's like
True.
that. There's something to be said about setting up challenges or setting up goals that when you're going to reach it, so that when you reach it, it's like you can have that full experience of dedicating yourself and then
Mm,
reaching that. And so encounters, is as fundamental as it gets. It's like we're talking about, you can go for a business award, or you can go for top sales at the end of the year in your league, or you can go for a sports, whether it's like recreational ball or or
Yeah.
MBA, like you can get involved in these different things, but nothing more fundamental than that the reality of the spiritual realm and helping people in their get free from baggage from their past, um,
Mm.
get free from demons, and become and walk in who God created them to be for their family, for their business, for their legacy. You know what I mean? And that's where you kind of feel like a superhero. Literally, we used to talk about that. It's like Jermaine, my business partner, was part of our leadership crew too, and he's talking about he'd be working those early years in his early 20s. He'd be working at like a call center, and it's like people don't really know who I am. You know what I mean? Like it's like I feel like a superhero. I was like call center by day, but like spiritual superhero by night. Like you're fighting for people's salvation. Like it doesn't get any bigger than eternity. You know what I mean? It's like that
Wow.
that war to be part of. So those contexts where you're actually seeing people get set free because and you got to be a part of it, that's probably, or you lead a session and you're literally just in war mode. You know what I mean? Like it's just and then the camaraderie that comes like that's probably the time where I feel most like a man.
Wow. Wow. That's really interesting. Like as you're explaining all this, like obviously it's not this, it's spiritual. I mean psychedelics get spiritual and everything, but like it's so much so like a shaman. Like shamans are doing that same type of work. They want to free people from things. They want to help people. They want people to be able to express who they actually are. And it's like, and I've heard it described the same way, like a war. Like I mean, you know me, like I've like I have mushrooms sat on my hand. I've been in sessions and ceremony where
Yeah,
I've seen shaman literally have to go to war with what's inside of people, to the
yeah,
point where they have to like hold them and like help them and heal them. And then they're in their own way, they're praying for them as all this is going on, and they're being bitten and scratched and punched and all this stuff. And it's like, it's wild to hear the same type of thing of like that war mode and that helping people and that servitude. Like
yeah.
that's the main thing that like really speaks out. That servitude. That's wild. That's like, yeah, that's really interesting how similar those two things are. The spiritual, the spiritual guidance that you guys have, and like how shamanism kind of works in that realm. Cause yeah, it's very, very, very much aligned in that sense. Obviously, it's much different because people are ingesting these semi-illegal substances and stuff, but like really, really interesting to hear that. Really
Well,
interesting.
and I think from like I've read some of that stuff, like different experiences people have had and so on and so forth, in terms of just testing the like there's a book called The Wedge, and it's a guy who he was the first person actually to really put Wim Hof on the map internationally, because he had
Okay.
Wim Hof in his book. Forgetting the guy's name right now, but he talked about it. His first book was what doesn't kill you, um, and it's like basically that whole idea of are we because we're in such a comfortable environment in the first world and in a fully developed nation, have we basically taken all of uh, the the discomforts out of our life, and in doing so made ourselves weak,
Mm.
because our body actually responds, our physiology responds to those things in ways that actually makes us stronger. And now we've become anemic because, and in some ways, emasculate ourselves because we're not tough anymore. And there's little health deficiencies because we've taken ourselves, we're artificially controlling our entire environment to protect ourselves uh, from stress. But there's a level of stress that's actually healthy for you. Like you
Yep.
you want to run a wind sprint, that's stressful, but that
Yep.
those small levels of stress actually make you stronger for life in general. So anyways, he was like that dude. I remember reading about some of those experiences, and I see it as, in a lot of cases, you have somebody who's got that heart to to help, and they got a call of God on their life to help. And from my perspective, they just didn't haven't necessarily found the right lane yet,
Mm.
uh, to be able to really be able to help. And sometimes you can access the spiritual realm through ways that are actually unsafe, It can open
Mm.
you up to the demonic and stuff like that, even though
Yeah.
you're well meaning in it. And so with the whole shaman, but the shaman thing, I'd look at someone like that and say, yo, they probably have a call on their life to be a pastor, to lead people to God, but because they don't necessarily have the full scope of information, they're kind of going through ways that isn't necessarily the safe to do so. So it can actually have a negative effect, even though your intention is to help people.
Yeah. It can definitely go both ways. Like I've seen it go both ways. I've seen people get into something called derealization, where all of a sudden you're unsure of what's real, and it lasts for like a couple days. So it's a really touchy situation where they got to really be watched and taken care of.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
it's like someone like me on the other side. Like I remember having my experiences, and the shaman were like, they're like, this is the exact experience that somebody, like, this is like the traditional, like, if you could wish anything for anybody, this was the experience. And I told them about the stuff that I saw. I don't know if I ever told you, I had one voice come to me, and it was like, you don't have to be here anymore.
I
Like, you don't
remember.
have, you're
I
like,
remember.
you don't have to do this anymore. You're good. Like,
Yeah,
you're fine. You don't have to be doing this anymore. And it was
yeah,
actually, the voice came up and it was like, look around you, like, listen, like, there's a lot of danger happening right now. This could happen. This could happen. Like, it was like showing me like all the things, like the police could come through the door. This person could have this happen. What if this happened? And you'd have to, like,
yeah, yeah.
it was showing me all of this. And then it was funny because afterwards I met like this healer woman, and we were asking her, me and my buddy were asking her about doing mushrooms and stuff. And she was like, to me, she's like, you're already so open. She's like, you don't need to be more open. She's like,
Remember.
any more open, you can welcome other things in. She's
Yeah,
like, you're already at a good point. You don't need to open yourself up anymore. And
yeah,
I really heeded those words. And honestly, I've never really done it again. I've never had a deep experience again, because I was like, that's all I was trying to achieve. I was trying to open up enough to take certain things in.
yeah.
And obviously, as you can see how my life's changing, that's happened now. So it's like, yeah, it can get really touchy in certain things. And yeah, I actually had a voice come to me and just say, like, you're good. Like, you don't have to do this. Like, you're good.
Well, and it's interesting because like with the whole the journey that different people are on, it's like, does that can accessing the spiritual realm through not through relating directly to God, or just sort of going after the universe, is that, can it be dangerous? Yes. Can God find people in that process and use that to draw people? Absolutely. You know what I
Of
mean? It's
course.
like it's like anybody's journey. God finds people all over the place, and in different steps of their life, you know, finds the way to speak to them in a way that draws them to himself. And whether people listen or not, that's up to them. That's the power and the danger of free will. But that whole journey, it's amazing. And that's where it's like there's so much openness. I think sometimes you'll talk to a person who's from a religious context, and they'll be like, "Oh, that stuff's of the devil." You know what I mean? And it's like,
Mm,
well, no, you got to understand the spiritual realm. You got to understand there's danger, and there's certain ways that God, the enemy takes advantage of. That, but in that whole process, when someone's seeking God, and God knows people's hearts more than anybody. When someone
mm,
seeks God, they might be going the complete opposite direction. God will be able to still speak to them and turn them around in the process. You know what I mean? It's like he's just when you allow him to be his own person in the equation, then it's like it's not all up to us. It's like
yeah.
he's got a part to play too. And sometimes he'll use different pieces of our journey that suck, and he never intended them. It wasn't his will, or he didn't allow it. Like he literally just, life happens, or the devil tries to take us out in certain ways. But
Mm,
and sometimes there's different factors involved, or maybe there's someone praying for us that we don't know about. Maybe we'll find out in
mm,
heaven, or sometimes we find out on earth. But it's like, which great gives God even more access to be able to come in certain situations. And it's like it's so interesting, the difference. Like you can see two people have a very similar journey, but they end up in entirely different places. One
mm,
way, like, what I mean, like down to the depths of despair in life, and the other person had the same factors, life factors, like whether it's broken home or this or that, or mental health issues or drug addiction or whatever.
Yeah.
And they got met by God in a way. And it's hard to sort of, just being a studier of humanity and of lives. It's just so interesting to hear people's stories and try and hear, because sometimes people don't include all the factors or all the variables, but try and hear, okay, so what's sort of the pattern here, or what made the difference in that person's life that allowed God to be able to get through to them in a way that they heard him so clearly.
Who knows? I mean, yeah, it's like we even have a friend, one guy in our men's group, he was talking about a night where he was doing mushrooms and this and that. And like that was the night later on that he heard God talk to him.
Yeah,
And then he changed himself over from there, right? And
yeah,
I've had that same type of experience. Like I've seen that in so many different instances where it's like it's all about whether or not, like in the psychedelic realm, we say like, you know, you have to do the work. Like you might hear this or see that, but like you have to go and do the work and actually go towards what you heard, you know? And
yeah,
in that person's case, they did. They were like, I'm gonna change my life, this, that. And like in terms of me, when that thing said to not be around it anymore, I did. And
yeah,
like that helped, that propelled me into this way that I am now. So it's like, yeah, it's and it's funny because Neil Brennan, the co-creator of the Chappelle Show, the white guy who helped Dave Chappelle make the Chappelle Show, he recently just did ayahuasca, and which is like one of the powerful ones. That's the one that I did. And he went from being a complete atheist to now he's like, God exists. He's like, obviously God exists. He's like, there's no disputing that God is real. He's like, I don't know much. He's like, I'm not religious or anything. He's like, but he's like, I can no longer say that God's not a real thing. So it's like,
yeah,
who knows where that takes him in the
yeah,
next 5 years? You know what I mean? Like now
yeah,
he's open to God being a real thing. Now he's open to like religions and stuff. And it's like, who knows what that does for him now? Like where that
yeah.
takes him.
Yeah, you know what I mean. And the person you were referring to in our group was Andre, my brother-in-law, and
Yeah.
type of thing where he grew up in a Catholic context, school wise, but it's like literally just school, no real religious backgrounds or anything. But and finishes the night of partying, and then he has this encounter with God, and this encounter with God, it's earmarked, even wasn't just a spiritual experience, encounter with God. He starts downloading like worship music and stuff like that. He doesn't even know worship music. You know what I mean? It's like the context. But in his case, he didn't have anybody on that same wavelength in his circle. So he was with it for a couple of days, but he just didn't know what to do with it exactly. And
Yeah.
you're surrounded by your circle, which again speaks to the influence of who we hang around and so on. But and he kind of fell back into whatever, but he was never the same internally from that point forward.
Yeah.
And then later on, it was interesting because he was in a situation where him and another friend of ours was they were skitched out. They're coming down, and they're kind of in that paranoid state. And they're we got to get our lives right. We got to get our lives right. And he had that context from back when, but he's still in mess. But he's like, we got to go to church. We got to go. Like they just knew they had to go to church.
Sick.
and back to almost full circle to what we were talking about earlier. They go to a church, and it's like it's just so boring they fall asleep, right? So it's like they had the heart, but they went to an environment that just didn't feed them. It didn't give them the answer they're looking for.
Yeah.
And but then the other friend knew one of my sisters and had been invited out to the church, so they ended up coming out to Church Without Limits at the time, which was our young. Yeah, you think we're this church is cool now? Like we are like just straight thug church back in the day, bro.
That's dope.
But it was like they came there and like gave their lives to God officially, but then Dre had that reference point of, oh, okay, this is what I experienced way back then on that night. My dad had the same type of thing. He was 12-year-old, real troubled childhood in many ways, way overweight, bully, miserable, and was literally planning to commit suicide just as a 12-year-old boy. And he reached out to God one night, and he didn't have any real context for God either, but he just said, God, if you make me skinny and give me friends, I'll do whatever you want. And then he just started to bawl. and fell asleep, woke up the next morning, and all of a sudden there was this voice. And he always remembered up from 12 up, he just kind of would refer to it as the voice, this awareness in his head that would tell him to do certain, like, shut up, don't say that.
Mm.
You know, don't, I mean, and literally the next morning, he had this empowerment felt to go to the library, went to the library, researched a simple diet for himself at 12 years old, came home with the ingredients for like cottage cheese and fruit and oatmeal, and didn't get no more sweets. And in 6 months, he dropped like 50 pounds.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And it's like, he didn't have any context for it until he got older. And then he was officially introduced to Jesus and to a relationship with God. He goes, that's what that was back then, but I didn't have a full context for it. So God catches us all in different ways in our journey and brings us home, you know?
That's wild. That's wild. That sounds like a lot like my story. Like, I don't know if I said those exact words, but I know I felt it. Like, I know, like, I was 330. I weighed 330. I remember I stepped on the scale. I would step on the scale a lot. And I remember I was so upset. And then I stepped on the scale again like 2 days later, and it went way past 330. And I was like, yo, I'm like, what's going on? Like, why do I keep just gaining weight? Like, felt like I didn't do much. I didn't have any context for like weight loss and this and that. But like, I
Yeah.
remember just being like, I remember looking in the mirror and being able to see myself like the way I look now, like skinnier and like more built.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember having that context, and then slowly, just the same kind of way, I was like, I think I can. I think I should just do this. I think I should do this instead. I think I should do this instead. And like you said, an awareness. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, I was like, my brothers are skinny and they're athletes. I'm like, what do they do? I'm like, okay, they do that. I'm like, my mom's a bodybuilder. What does she do? I'm like, oh, we have weights in the garage. I'm like, okay, like let me set up these weights. Let me set up the bench. Like I just had this new awareness, and I just started day after day. I just started pursuing it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was like in one summer. I remember my brother, like, because he was real troubled, like back in the day. So he was like not living at home, and then like he came back. He would just like randomly come back, and all of a sudden he was just like, "Yo," he's like, "Look at you." He like grabbed my wrist. He's like, "Yo, what is this?" He's like, "Yo." He's like, "You got a vein in your hand, bro." He's like, "Yo," he's like, "Keep doing whatever you're doing." And I was like, "Okay, this is actually working, you know?" Because
Yeah.
you can't tell day by day, but I was like, it's happening, it's happening. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny the way that happens. But I guess like let's go through some questions. I just want to know what is your outlook on vulnerability? Like, as a man today, how do you feel about vulnerability, and how do you deal with that?
Uh, Superpower.
True.
It's a super. If a man learns how to be like, because vulnerability is it's the essence of authenticity.
Mm,
You know, like being able to be vulnerable is be able to have the courage and the confidence to show your true self.
mm,
And I think the idea of vulnerability, one, is it's a huge key in walking into freedom as a man, because you you can't get free from problems that you don't have. Like
true.
you got to be able to acknowledge a problem to be able to deal with it.
Mm,
And part of that is being able to acknowledge it to God. But then there's an aspect where God's created us. Part of our journey of freedom is being vulnerable and being open, and being known by other men. And so it's some people are, oh, I'm just gonna, me and God are gonna deal with it. And it's like that's not how he set it up. He's there's a one our our place in the world. There's so much for us to gain from community and from family. The idea
mm,
of family, obviously, we have our God-given blood family, but the idea of family is that belonging and that community that runs deeper, that acceptance, that unconditional love is family. And God has that for every one of us. So even if you come from a broken family, God still has family for you. In some ways, your a lot of the context of what God had us grow up in, which is so beautiful, was family. God didn't say, okay, how am I going to describe my relationship to to these human beings. Oh, well, they're in family, so let me relate to that. No, he's the original father. Family started with him, and then he actually gave us family to help us understand our context to him, not the other way around.
Mm,
So like, so our belonging and his desire to be a father to us, we start to learn. We're supposed to start to learn from a very young age through the context of our own family.
mm,
And that's why the position of father is such an important position, because you are a living example, tutoring your child on their relationship with God from a very young age.
true.
An absent father actually puts a block in a barrier in a child's uh, way, sometimes a stumbling block in terms of them being able to relate to God properly, because their idea or their experience with father is not a good one,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So it's like the the whole that whole idea of family that we need, tracing all the way back to vulnerability, is without vulnerability, you can never really know that you're accepted by other people. You can never
True.
walk in relationship with other people. And there's a depth of when you know that you're accepted for who you really are, like you share your failings and someone doesn't blink and they accept you anyways, then there's no lie in the back of your head saying if they knew who you really were,
Mm,
they
true.
would they look at you differently.
That's true. That's
You know?
actually, yeah. That's actually a great way to put it. That's a great way to put it. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And then in that too, it's like, guess what? They're going through too.
Mm,
And and so it depends if you're trying to get free or you're coming up, people can help when they know who you really are. People can people can love you, and but if you don't truly share who you really are, you'll never be able to fully receive it, because you still have that thing in the back of your head saying, well, if they knew who you really were, well, for, for all you know, they could know who you really are and still love you and accept you. But if you're too
yeah.
afraid to show that, then you'll never be able to receive it.
True. That's big facts. That's so true. That's
But
so
then,
true. I
but
mean,
then, likewise, the full way around, as a leader, when you show your weakness or you show your vulnerability, you're empowering them. You're actually giving them permission to share their weakness. And the new person coming in or the person growing up, you're to share their weakness. They go, oh, you struggle with that too. It's like all of a sudden the common denominators go even deeper. The relational level goes even deeper, because you realize none of us are perfect. All of us are a work in progress. All of us are have our shortcomings, and it's not our perfection. It's not our that false picture of perfection that allows someone to be successful and someone not to be successful, because everybody's got their faults. And vulnerability actually allows us to connect on that level.
yeah, yeah, that's so true. That is part of the reason why I got all these tattoos. That was one thing that I said to people, because I'm like, when people see it, like you'd be surprised who thinks about this or who talks about it. Like right away, like Dre saw it, and he was like, oh, he's like, oh, you got, okay, so you got, like, so many people, doctors, high to do people, they'll see the tattoos and all of a sudden they'll be like, okay, I can open up about this certain thing to this
Yeah,
person,
yeah,
like I can talk about this with this person. Or if I let people know that I was in addiction, or if I let people know, I had to come out of the closet, so to speak, like in terms of like relationship with God and stuff like that. Like when you're just open about stuff, yeah, I've noticed that people right away, like you said, it gives permission. Like right
yes,
away, people are just like, I can talk to this guy. Like it's very important. Even my coach was talking about, he's like, yo, he's like, you've been a drug dealer, he's like, you've been a debt collector, he's like, you were fat, he's like, you had your dad leave you, he's like, you were assaulted, he's like, tell everybody all of this, he's like, there's no one you can't relate to, he's like,
yeah,
there's no one who can't like talk to you about something, he's like, you've been through so many different things, he's like you've been cheated on, he's like, you're this buff guy who got cheated on, and he's like, you're this, like, he's like, you have all this stuff. He's like, are you kidding me? He's like, tell everybody. He's like, tell the world about this stuff. Cause it's like,
yeah.
it just all right away gives people permission to just open up. That's so true, man. That's so true. So when it comes to vulnerability, what's a time that you felt the most vulnerable and how did you deal with it?
Um, I I think. uh, it's funny too, because some of these things, when you start to look at them, like we're looking at them as
Mm,
something that's a strength, it's a power to be able to be that. It takes the fear out of it to a large extent,
yeah.
you know. Um, the and because, like, I mean, I'll share about mental health issues as part of our talks in schools. I'll, like, whenever we're doing that, like, share very candidly, and people are always very thankful. But there's no stigma attached to my own story for me, So it's like it actually just becomes a weapon to help set other people free, because it doesn't define who I am anymore. But and I think sometimes people will be really appreciative. And Jermaine, my business partner, always tell me how powerful my story is. But you've kind of lost that, because it's like you're so used to your own story, and it doesn't even define you. It's just part of your history. Just like you're talking about with mushrooms and all that different stuff. It's kind of the vulnerability, literally wearing it on your sleeve. It's like,
Yeah.
which is powerful, because it's like, I'm just going to put my story right out there. Uh, but a time where I've actually felt the most vulnerable is probably different times where I've had to share something um, that was really tripping me up in my mind, that will to help me get free of it. That I I was scared of what that having that thought run through my mind, or taking the wrong action on a certain thought or whatever, that type of stuff, or maybe not defending myself against it the way I should have.
Mm,
Sharing that, and just being so ashamed and embarrassed about that even being a thing. You know what I mean? Um,
sure.
and that was probably, and again, when you have good people in your corner, it's like that is the confidence, because you share and they don't bat an eye, they don't change. You're like, oh, okay, I'm still okay.
Yeah, man, that's so true. True, true, true. Okay, okay. So when it comes to, say, dealing with your emotions,
uh,
like as a man, how do you go about dealing with your emotions? How do you express? Like, what do you do when it comes to that kind of thing?
for me, I'm like the type of personality that's pretty easygoing, for the most
Mm,
part, pretty level-headed. It's hard to get me angry, really, to a large extent. Uh, and I'm one of those people that's really, I can get along with a lot of different people. I can be very gracious, very forgiving, very understanding with a lot of people, and I like to be in good relationship with people. So I'll go the extra mile sometimes to try and make things right. Plus, I kind of feel like that's my responsibility as someone. God's forgiven me for so many things, so it's like my job is to forgive someone's wronged me. And so even if I have a disagreement with somebody, a lot of times I'll be the first one to address it, and just share where I felt I was wrong, just to clear my conscience, but also to really be someone who's really looking to reconcile with people. But the when it comes to emotions, another aspect of tied to the vulnerability is, I think true strength is being able to express a full range of our emotions as human beings. And in our culture, a lot of times for men, we have been sold a bill of goods that you're not allowed to, as a man, express a full range of emotions. You can express joy, you can express anger, you can express excitement, but you can't express pain, uh, or hurt,
mm,
uh, or um, and in the form of a simple thing like crying. Crying for many men, either consciously or subconsciously, is a sign of weakness, and a sign more of femininity than it is of masculinity. And that's that's one of the biggest lies that's really messed up a lot of men, in just being able to be healthy emotionally.
mm,
Because when you can't express certain emotions, you get emotionally constipated.
Yep.
and it leads to outbursts of anger, but you weren't really angry, you were just hurt.
Mm.
And if you dealt with it on a hurt level, like we'll look at the context of a relationship. Think about this with your wife. She does something that hurts you. That didn't hurt me. You know what I mean? It's in anything, whatever, you know, but it's boiling on the inside and it actually did hurt you. And if it doesn't address, it ends up coming out later on in anger.
Yep.
But it didn't really address the issue. So now she's hurt because of your anger, and it leads often to saying something that you didn't mean or going below, like, I mean, it's sort of to relational breakdown. But how's your wife wired? If you shared your vulnerability in that moment of saying, man, when you said that, it really hurt me. Now she actually has an opportunity for sympathy and empathy and to look at what she did wrong. But when you don't address the real issue, now you come back in an issue and now you're just as wrong, and it muddies the water. You can't really get stuff solved. And it's sort of like so when it comes to emotions, there's so much literally, and I know you know this, but the whole like our mental health, our physical health, there's certain illnesses that exist because of pent up emotion, of not being able to process our emotions. And that's the thing. Tears, if you have tear ducts, that's a sign that you're supposed to use them.
Facts. Right? True.
You know,
Very true.
Why would you have tear ducts if they weren't there to be used? You know, it's like so the idea of, well, no, you can't, you know, you got, and there is a balance in there in terms of like, as little boys learning to not be weak, but understand the difference between weakness and strength. And like, and that's where, again, it works best when you have a good legacy. Like, again, my dad's the type of guy, I've watched him cry at almost every wedding he goes to. You know, like a soft heart. But then I know my dad's one of those guys too, that if a man came into our house and was, you know, going to harm us or try to kill us, my dad wouldn't think twice before killing a man.
Yeah.
Like, he's just, I know that about him. You know what I mean? Like, he wouldn't blink, he wouldn't stutter, and he wouldn't have an issue doing that. So that dichotomy, or that, you know, that combination where you can be, and a great example in the Bible is David. David, like, you just see Psalms is his diary. Like, it's his writings, it's his poetry, it's his diary. And you see a full range, man. You see when he's just depressed and crying out to God and just weeping. He goes, my tears fill my, you know, my bucket, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, tears day and night. But then he's a warrior at the same time. Oh, you can be both. You see what I'm saying? Like, that picture of masculinity of a full range, where if you're in pain, you can process it, you can cry about it. If you're hurt by something, then identify it as hurt, not just disrespect, but identify it as, that hurt me.
Yeah.
You know? And even in that process, you're allowing the healing to begin, because you're processing the different emotions you're feeling, rather than having them kind of get stuck inside.
So true. That's so true. Like, you gotta express it. Like I remember hearing like Black men have like the leading in like prostate dysfunction, prostate cancer and stuff like that. And it's like, we're a very macho culture in the sense of don't cry and don't be weak and that shit didn't hurt me and this and that. And it's like, and then when you talk about emotional constipation, it's like, when we have emotions that we hold in, we actually push them down. And like, if I'm going like this down, like what's lower and lower, it's the prostate. So it's like, it's funny that happens, like, in that culture of men, and also they have that ailment, you know. So it's like,
so true. Yeah, no, and it's also interesting, like, again, having had the opportunity to be on, probably, I don't know, somewhere between 30 and 50 of these encounter weekends, with different groups of people, mixed gender, all males, so on and so forth. It's like watching men get free from emotional baggage, from father wounds, from self regret, and just sexual addiction, all that different stuff.
Yeah.
One of the first things that happens when a man gets free, in many cases, is they cry.
Yep.
So again, it just reinforces for me that tears are a sign of freedom.
Yeah.
Not a sign of weakness.
And cleansing.
Yeah.
Like literally cleansing, something coming out of you. It's like
Yes.
purging, like when you have certain experiences, you purge. I mean, like even in the psychedelic realm, it's like you take a certain psychedelic and then you purge. And like people will give encounters that they'll say like, I threw up my resentment to my mother. And in your head, you're like, how are you describing what they're like, I can't describe it, but that's what it was. It was like, I would have this thought and I knew I needed to get rid of it. And then all of a sudden this came up and now all of a sudden it's gone. And it's like, it's so crazy how that happens. And same thing happens with tears. Like you're talking about guys releasing emotional baggage and then they start crying. It's like, cause that was what was built up the whole time. You finally got to purge that out, that hurt, that anxiety, that everything that you've been holding on to finally gets to come out. It's great. It's actually great. Another one is oh, my bad. Another one is what's your biggest regret as a man, like going into manhood? Like what's something that you wish that you had started doing sooner as a man but didn't because of whatever holding you back in young age?
Yeah. Biggest regrets. Man, I'm having to think about that.
That's good. That's a great sign.
Yeah, well, I mean, but it's one of those things. It's funny. I haven't really like sort of narrowed that down, because I think there are. I think I would say I think even to this day, there's a level of kind of looking in the context of like life and even spiritual dedication, consecration. We've talked about that being set apart for a purpose, for a cause or something like that. The level of and sort of relative to like an Olympic athlete sets themselves apart for that journey. It's very countercultural, just even on a natural level. Like you're getting up different hours, you're eating different things, you're living a different life, you're sacrificing certain things to achieve that goal. I think not, and it's still I find it still a struggle this day to live at that level of consecration, that dedication to see what's really possible for God to do through somebody when you realize how deep it can go. And wanting to live with a balance, because I can be a little over the top in some of my processes, even some of the mental health stuff from the past, if you get too rigid with certain things and so on. But I would say probably not testing those limits the way I would have liked to, in terms of really setting myself apart. Probably more, a lot of people would probably look at me and say, well, Joel, you look what you do and you lead and this and that. But, that idea of, not necessarily setting yourself apart to the level you think you should, or you felt called to, and what you might have missed because of that.
Oh, so you're talking about like stepping into that consecration more so, like leaning into it more so. So you're
Yeah.
talking about like
Yes,
like
yes,
a
but
like
also like, I mean, I'm 41 now, so it's like, where would I be with that if I started that 20, the level, the level where you feel make this choice and this choice, and but it's like nobody else is doing that, you know what I mean? Or it's like,
Mm,
or to a level that you're just, I kind of want to just live life, or I kind of want to just uh, live a little less uh, countercultural. It's like
yeah.
I want to participate a little bit more in just things in this world or whatever. You know what I mean? In terms of levels that might seem okay and maybe are for some people, but for what you kind of feel drawn to, you're like you feel like you should give certain things up or certain sacrifices, from a young age, and
True.
where if you put those things in place, what would be different, but where you're at right now, or what things are you struggling with still that you wouldn't be struggling with anymore, like that type of stuff.
Yeah. True. True. That's very true. I think, yeah, I think of that with the clothing company that I'm starting now, because I wanted to do that when I was 20. This is like 16 years later. I
Yeah.
think about that with getting clean from drugs, like, because I've wanted to do that since I was like 16. Like a lifetime ago, I wanted to do that. 20 years, like I've always wanted that. Yeah, I think of that a lot. Like, where would I be now if I had done that? If I had that black mamba mentality towards towards those certain things, right?
Yeah.
you know
Which is so interesting too, right? The whole, because the mom mentality, it's like, I think to a certain extent, that's part of that was kind of a makeup gift that Kobe had as well. And I'm not going to put it all in a gift category, but it's just like, to live that way and not be absolutely miserable, you got to be wired a certain way. You know what I mean? Like it's so,
yeah, man.
like often people, you'll see pundits talk about, oh, Vince Carter, if he had more of a Kobe mentality, but that's just not the way he's wired either, for life. So yes, he could have been great in this area, but he was also a more pleasant human being to be around from right from the jump, whereas Kobe,
Exactly.
he had to sort of become that later around 38.
Yeah,
Like
true.
that type of stuff. That's sort of the balancing factor in some of those areas. But I think maybe just in certain areas, dedication or sacrifice, and not making those on that personal level, uh, the way that I felt I could have, and sort of
Wow.
how that is affect how that affects. And again, the beauty is we still got life ahead of us, right? So it's like,
Yo, yeah, that's true. You know what I really want to do? Like, even hearing you say this, because I know a lot of shaman. I know a couple pastors types like
hmm,
yourself, and I know a bunch of shaman, and they have this exact same thing
yeah,
where they're like I'm on this path and I can't do everything that the world does because there's this calling
yeah,
and there's a certain cultivation of energy that I have to go through. Like my buddy's same way. He's a certain age and he's like no women. He's like, stay away from that. He's like, we don't need that type of thing. Like this casual encounter type stuff is not good for your soul and your energy and everything.
yeah,
And it's funny to hear the similarities. I'd love to get like four pastor types, four is like some religious people and some like shaman type people, and get them together and talk about stuff, because there's so many similarities. There's so many differences, but there's so many similarities as well. It's really a trip.
yeah,
Really a trip to hear.
yeah.
But
For sure.
we're coming up on 2 hours, so I'll just ask you the last one. Um, actually, like, let's do the last two. So for you, what's the most difficult part about being a man?
Most difficult part of being a man. I would, I would say probably the most difficult part is the it is the most it's the most rewarding part at the same time when you get it, and that's sort of the whole idea. If you don't get a great chance, you don't get a great win without a great battle, right? You don't get a championship without a great battle.
Yep.
Is l- facing your fears daily and living outside of your comfort zone.
Mm, true. True. That is the best part, and yeah, and the hardest part, because it's daily and it's scary and it's all the time. And
Yeah.
once you get out of that comfort zone, there's another one. It's like,
And that becoming familiar with and developing your relationship with failure, because it's a process. Changing your viewpoint on it, right? Because the process, a learning curve, starts with failure.
true.
It's like the nature of a learning curve is you suck at the beginning and you're great by the end. And if you're continuing to develop, that means you're ready to move on to a new learning curve, which means you're going to suck again.
So true. So true. I do that with the board that you see that I have that I post on Instagram all the time. It's like once one of the goals gets super easy and I've done it consistently for like 4 or 5 weeks, I know it's either time to up that or it's time to just get rid of that one altogether and like take something that really I've been struggling with and throw that up on there.
That's
It's
good.
and then also in those 98%, 100% weeks, they turn into like they go down to like 70, 60% because now all of a sudden I'm struggling with this one and it's hindering this one. And it's like, oh man. And then you got to build yourself back up again.
That's a great, you know, uh, context in which you kind of it's a look at life. It's like
Mm,
a smaller circle that represents life at large as to how we should live it right there.
yeah, true. True. And then I guess the last one, what was the last one? Oh, if you could give young men who are having trouble on their path to manhood some advice, what would it be? Young men of today.
Young men of today. The foundation is uh, relationship with God, and it's it starts with asking for help.
Mm, mm,
And because there's so many different factors, there's so many different variables, and there's all these things these self-help books, and these people are telling you who you need to be as a man, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of motivation we can gain from those things. But it's like when I look at men on their journey, it's like it's a journey. And
mm.
we need God putting the puzzle pieces together on the journey. It's sort of like, and you're going to get motivated from this person over here, and you're going to have this experience that's going to shape you over here. But I want somebody orchestrating it. I want to know that I'm not in this thing on my own, and you're not. And God's working on most people's behalf. I mean, if someone's under the sound of my voice right now, God's working on behalf of the very fact that you're listening to this conversation right now. It's like, and he's going to bring you a lot of different things, but understanding like just that it's as simple as asking for help. And if you sincerely ask God for help, then he will help you on your journey. It doesn't get any simpler than that. And the prayer can be as simple as help.
Yep.
It's not big fancy words. It's like, God, I need help. And he's looking for sincere hearts. He's not looking for elaborate words. He's looking for sincere hearts. And it's like, that's why I hear context in all these different, like we were talking about the shaman experience. For some people, they're looking, and people are looking. And if there's people messing around in good churches, like where God's there, but they're messing around, they're nominal, they're just sort of dipping their toe.
Yep.
And then there's people on the other side of the world who are in a Muslim faith who are serious about finding God. And God has an easier time redirecting that person on the other side of the world sometimes than the person who's not really, who's just diluted and sort of going through the motions over here sometimes, because he can, if he gets a sincere heart who's desperate or who just sincerely is asking for help and is willing to act on what he's going to say, then he that's the fundamental key. And it doesn't matter where you are in your journey or how far you are in the hole you feel. It's like God can bring you out. He can work with somebody who's open to receiving help and just sincerely seeks him, sincerely cries out for help.
True. True, true. I have one bonus question for you because I know you've had a long time to think about it.
Yeah.
What are the hopes that you have for your son?
The hopes that I have for my son. Uh, one of them is that he'll have at least one brother, because I want to have multiple sons. Uh, I want to have a lot of kids, but that that oh man, that he'll know God from a young age. That he'll uh, that he'll live a life that's honoring to God, and that he'll, simply put, that he'll realize and walk out, fulfill the purpose that God created him for uniquely in his generation, and that he'll have the impact on his generation on the planet that God intended him to have. Because when a person comes into this world, it's not by accident, and there's a purpose for it in the timing. I mean, we could have been born anytime in history, but we were born right now. We could have been connected to anybody, but we know each other. We could have been in any country. And our parents, 3 generations back, 2 generations back, immigrated to this place called Canada.
Mm.
And there's a purpose for Canada. There's a purpose for us. And so all that back to my son is that he'll be secure and walk in that from a young age. He wouldn't have any detours in life that he'd have to, come back around from, but that he'd be able to realize that and walk in it and have an impact on his peers in grade school, impact on his peers in high school, impact on his peers in university, and just have that upward trajectory right from the start in terms of just fulfilling the purpose. And it doesn't have to be, that's the beautiful thing with God's purpose, is like our world has a certain sense of greatness as to the size, but God sees it very differently, because he's called different people to different spheres, and some of them are in positions of great notoriety. But God's called the person to be there, but God's also called someone to the small, to work with the homeless. And and we don't know their name. We won't know their name until we get to heaven. You know what I mean? Like, and they don't have the notoriety of our world, but their name's known in heaven. And sort of being able to differentiate true greatness from our world's perverted sense of greatness. In walking in your purpose. So to be able
Definitely.
to have a good handle on that, that I'd be able to help him find that, help be an example of it.
Yeah, success versus significance.
Yes.
Yeah, that type of thing. Definitely, definitely. Man, thank you so much for doing this, man.
Hey, it's been fun. It's fun. I was like, when we said we are going to do it Zoom, I was like, oh man, and Zoom's a little more formal. Like, you feel like you really get into that conversational groove even easier. But you did a good job of really helping us find that vein early on. So kudos to you. And it worked out good. Time flew.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Definitely. But yeah, guys, that's been the Open Brother Project. It's been Joel Witton. Where can they find you? What's your TikTok going to be called? I'm still holding you. You got how many more days you got? You got 10 more days, man.
I do. I've been thinking about it. Both under Joel Witton. So just my name first and last. I'm sure the name will be on the podcast, so people will be able to see the spelling, whatever. But I'll spell the last name anyways, because a lot of people mess up the last name. Witton.
All right, dope. And also, I guess if people are looking for people to speak at schools, what's your company called there?
Inspiration Republic, and
Okay.
that's for Twitter. It's Inspiration Rep. For Instagram, it's Inspiration Republic, one word, and then the website's inspirationrepublic.org.
Perfect. All right, man. Thank you so much for being here. And guys, that's been the godly episode. And we're out.